Hello and welcome to Newspeak, the New Culture Forum's look at the weekly news agenda. Very pleased, as usual, to have our senior fellows with us, Rafe Heydel-Mankoo, historian and royal commentator, and Dr. Philip Kiszely from Leeds University cultural historian. Welcome, guys. Right, well, this week, of course, we've had Harry in the dock, or is it Harry in the witness box? But anyway, that's been quite a big thing this week, and we're going to be talking about that. Also, of course, there was this rather offensive video brought out by Oxfam charity. We're going to be discussing that. And finally, we're going to be look at the number of chickens coming home to roost when it comes to COVID. There's been a report out by the Johns Hopkins College University in Chicago, which more or less says that lockdowns were a huge public disaster. I'm sure there are many of you who will disagree violently with that. Anyway, we'll start off with Harry, actually. Now, if you've been commenting on this GB News, haven't you, pretty much all week, sir? Is he now out of the witness box? Is he?
Yes, so he's had a day and a half of grilling by the beast of the courtroom, Andrew Green, who's the counsel, the barrister for the Mirror Group, who's been basically slicing through all of the arguments of Prince Harry with surgical skill and revealing that there's not much meat on the bones of his arguments, the bones of his case. It's been an historic occasion. This is the first time for 130 years that a member of the royal family has actually gone in to give evidence.
Prince of Wales? Prince of
It
Wales?
was. It was.
1890,
Croft case, wasn't it? Yeah.
He got into trouble with there was a baccarat game with a chap who used to lend him his house for illicit encounters, and anyway he went into the witness box. But it's been quite astonishing. You know, we had yesterday when he first went into the box. Well, I said that when we were recording, where Prince Harry actually said that the government was at rock bottom. Something completely without precedent to have a member of the royal family, and he still is a member of the royal family, albeit not working, actually criticise his father's government. I mean, it's astonishing. But also what we realised was that, you know, this was supposed to be his great day in court when he could finally, after years, hold the press to account. And what we realised was that there wasn't much substance to any of his arguments. There were 33 key articles which were supposed to have been written on the basis of information got through phone hacking and so forth. And it turns out much of that information was already in the public domain before the articles were published. Other information had been given by Princess Diana in an interview. And it just seems that throughout, this man doesn't even recall reading these articles, the ones that allegedly gave him decades of paranoia. He can't even recall whether or not he read them. And so all you see is a deeply disturbed person who much of his grievances are actually figments of his imagination, it seems almost.
Yeah, he apparently appeared very, very uncomfortable, is that right?
Yeah, well, he looks... Well, we don't know for a start because there are no cameras there, but we had just conflicting evidence about that. But he has got quite tetchy under some of the cross-examination, and the skill of this barrister actually is to be more conversational than confrontational, and lull you into a false sense of security, so you will divulge things you weren't supposed to divulge, and you won't be aware that you've actually done it.
Yeah. Well, I think this is a really good example of him. He's not used to people actually properly questioning him, is he? He's, Oprah, versus this barrister, who's very pleasant, but is a kind of pleasant assassin, isn't he? I was just thinking about the 1890 case, the Baccarat scandal, and in that instance, the Prince of Wales they had to drag him kicking and screaming to the witness box. This is the complete opposite, but I think as soon as he got there, from what I can gather and from what you've been saying, he's really regretting it, isn't he? Because I suppose in a way it's this huge privilege that he has that he doesn't realise he has, that he takes for granted. And as soon as he gets up against someone who really knows what they're doing, who's a real professional, yes, he's going to fall to pieces. Can I just ask, has he played the race card as far as his wife's concerned yet, or not?
No, that hasn't come up because
Right.
we're dealing about a period before he actually met Meghan Markle.
Yes,
so Chelsea Davy was his love interest at the time.
Yeah,
And he
but,
says
there
that
was a piece today, I think, in the Telegraph where he did mention Meghan Markle. That's why I asked,
right.
actually. So I think he has mentioned her. I just wondered whether he played the race card. or
Not to my not to my knowledge, but it is interesting that because of course we have to say it's easy to pile on Prince Harry. In the 1980s and 90s, the British tabloid press were absolutely evil.
They were poisonous.
They were vile, and I could fully understand why Chelsea Davy decided that it wasn't worth the trouble to stay with him. And you can only think of those what ifs of history. What if they actually had stayed together? We would have been spared all of the drama of the last 3 years. But we went into this expecting Prince Harry to reveal a smoking gun, and it's ended up being a completely damp squib. And as you say, I just wish Andrew Green had been sitting on that sofa next to Oprah.
I think this is one of those things where it isn't a clear-cut case, as you say, because of historically what's happened and the nature of the tabloid press. It isn't a clear-cut case of right or wrong, but I think what it will do is make people sit up, and it might make him grow up a little bit. This might be very good for him, and it might enable him to kind of see his own life, and I've said it before, but his own privilege in clearer and more kind of mature sight.
You see, I'm sort of like rather resent even having to think about him in that way. I mean, he's important to me insofar as he is a member of the royal family and what he should do as a member of the royal family. Other than that, I don't really care. But it has become very much a kind of psychological study of him. With this government thing, I don't quite know why he said it actually. He said the press, right, and the government, are the main, criteria by which people judge a country, and ours are at rock bottom, right?
Well,
So basically, press, I can understand him saying that, but he made one point, which is actually, I think, perfectly valid, which is when he said that you don't have a press even holding a government to account anymore. And I think that's actually correct, even though it seems to be entirely beside the point. Why did he
Well,
make
they're
the
selective in how they hold the government to account. I don't think anyone could say they didn't hold the government to account over these parties, for example, and and so forth. But his argument basically was that the press and the government go hand in hand, but also, of course, he's got a lawsuit against the Home Office as well. The first member of a royal family to take his father's government to court over the provision of security when he's in the country. So there are several cases that are going on here. Not to mention the case in America where the Heritage Foundation, the premier right-wing think tank in the world, is taking the Department of Homeland Security to court over Prince Harry's visa application and whether or not he lied on it. So the Heritage Foundation have the Homeland Security in their crosshairs over immigration issues in general, and what they want to see is there are two questions on the immigration visa which mention drug use. Did he answer those truthfully, in which case why was he granted a visa, or if he answered them untruthfully, he should be ejected from the country. And America's been very strict on this. What's her name, Nigella Lawson wasn't allowed to board a flight to America in 2013. Pete Doherty from the Libertines was sent back as soon as he arrived in America for previous drug uses. So the judge today in America ruled that the government has 1 week to reveal the immigration visa. If they don't, then it will go before the courts to decide whether it should be released and revealed. And if it turns out that he lied, or that it was truthful even, he could be deported.
Yeah, well, this is what happens, isn't it? When you stir up these things, when you're absolutely monomaniacal about something, and you don't think about the repercussions because you're totally focused on something that's extremely personal, and the repercussions are extremely public. I'm sorry, but there you go.
I think, going back to this whole farrago, really, going right back to Oprah, and when they basically accused a member of the royal family for what they call being racist, what a lot of other people would assume was actually quite a reasonable remark to make about the baby, that for me that was the linchpin of so much of this in terms of damage. But in fact, they've never followed up on that, have they at all? They made I don't think it's even mentioned in his biography, any of that stuff. So I mean, I just wonder,
Well, he
whether,
backtracked. He did
whether
say
that was a lie.
He backtracked in an interview and said, "Well, nobody in my family is racist," and that's not that wasn't the implication.
No.
Of course, it was the implication.
And all of this, we've done it to death, I know, but all of this victimhood, it's easy to forget, isn't it, that he was so hugely popular and he got away with all sorts of stuff. The things that some of the stunts he pulled, wearing a swastika and stuff like that. I think he was treated with very, very easily, very lightly for that, and people adored Meghan, and the wedding was such a joyous occasion. His memory just stops, I think, at the Oprah Winfrey thing, and that's where it starts.
Some of the things he's come out with and said have been quite astonishing. Today he said that it's not in the public interest as to whether or not he took drugs. But I'm sorry, if you were a politician or you are a member of the royal family and then you're being funded by the state, there is a public interest. And in fact, it was only a few months ago that it was claimed in the Daily Mail and elsewhere that whenever there's going to be a drug test on his military base, he was excused to go on urgent business to Buckingham Palace each time there's going to be a drug. Now, is that not a public interest issue when the military is giving you a free pass?
Exactly, it's hugely. But I mean, this public interest thing, community responsibility versus personal freedom is as old as the hills. I remember in 1967 when all the Rolling Stones got put in prison, Mick Jagger made the same argument. Well, what I do personally has nothing to do with my professional life. Even though millions and millions of young people are going to emulate him. So, he's better people have done it.
Yeah. So she's well and truly keeping out of it, isn't she, Meghan Markle?
I don't blame her.
Yeah, well, of course, her PR team have advised them both recently that they need to take a step backwards, because they've been too much in the news, and all the news around them has been negative. And Meghan is acutely aware of that, and she is not supporting her husband in this. She thinks this is a mistake, but this is his personal vendetta. And also she thinks that Spare was a mistake, because that made them into an international laughing stock with South Park and so forth. Our privacy tour, global privacy tour, talking about his frozen todger on television, all this sort of stuff. And she realizes what the damage that has, and so she's now trying to relaunch herself through her TIG, which made her famous in the first place.
Is it called TIG?
I can't remember, but this is a lifestyle luxury website, something to do with makeup and things, I imagine. That's basically her view now, is that she wants to essentially carve her own path in life now that she's got all she can from Prince Harry, which has given her the leapfrogging into the upper echelons of society, allegedly. She'll now use that, and now he's become a liability more than an asset.
And so we can see a separation in the future. We can see a divorce. We can see him coming back. We can see, oh dear, poor Harry. More of the same.
The level of conspiracy theories now on this are quite extraordinary. I mean, if you ever looked, I mean, there are people. The level of visceral hatred, actually for her particularly, is. I've actually got more of a thing for him, because I think he's been just treacherous in some ways. But I mean, she is hated. I mean, the whole thing's about the family not really being real.
She's the Yoko Ono of the 21st century, isn't she?
I think that's unfair to Yoko Ono.
It's unfair to Yoko Ono, but yeah.
But anyway, while he was tuning away there in the witness box, there's been a really nasty video actually came out. I think nasty, which was published by Oxfam as part of their support for this Pride Month that's going on. You must have seen about it maybe now, but it had a particularly bad representation in it of people who attack, the trans movement. Philip, what was the main sort of cause of the controversy with this?
Well, this was a video, wasn't it, which had a woman, a cartoon version of a woman like a demon with red eyes and this horrible face with TERF written on her.
Trans exclusionary
radical feminist. TERF. This is a term, but this caricature actually looks quite a lot like JK Rowling.
Right.
Okay, so that's where it starts. People saw this, and there was quite rightly an uproar. Bearing in mind, Oxfam's previous with abuse and women and allegations and God knows prostitutes and God knows what. Okay, so there's that. But if you think about the culture, the current crisis in culture and society, this is almost like a case study in a way, right? So you've got, there's a crisis of purpose here. They're supposed to be about helping to eradicate poverty.
It's particularly poverty and family. That's what Oxfam
That's what they're about.
Yeah.
And yet they are acting as cheerleaders for the trans lobby. Okay. Now, in doing that, they're exactly the same as public funded organisations, institutions right across the country. Okay, so they're very much like that. Beneath that, there's a moral crisis, isn't there? Because they're obsessed with sex, they're obsessed with kink, they're imbuing that with some kind of intellectualism that it just doesn't have. It's classic identitarianism. And what's it doing for them? You've already said there's a backlash from Twitter. So people are boycotting them like there's no tomorrow.
They've actually taken that.
They've taken it down, but even so, they're boycotted like there's no tomorrow. Okay, they've demonised and alienated most of their workforce in the UK, who tend to be older, gender critical feminist women. That's
really?
Well, that's who work. They volunteer in Oxfam shops. And finally, of course, the trans lobby, the psychotic trans lobby, has turned on them. So they're getting it from in a perfect symmetry. They're getting it from all angles, and quite rightly they should do.
But the thing is, I think the point you made is they shouldn't even really be doing this, should they? I mean, do they get any government money at all, Oxfam?
I don't know if they do.
I think they do.
Stuff,
I think they do, and it was stopped because of one of the scandals. I think in 2018 it was withheld, but I think I'm not quite. Viewers will know, it's easy enough to Google, but I think that they're being funded again.
There were a couple of. We're showing it on the screen actually at the moment. As you can see, this is one of the images from the video. And you can see there's that JK Rowling type character in the middle. The other two, one looks a bit like Ron DeSantis, and the other one, it's been suggested was our very own Andy No.
Andy No. Oh, wow.
Yes.
But they've all been given these kind of strange Mandarin type sort of.
Yes, I mean this is what struck me first when I saw
the racism.
Image. Well, firstly, it was the clear. When you look at how it was drawn, you can see it was drawn almost with an aggression. There's a hatred in the way that the sharp lines. Yeah. And the whole thing just, to me, exudes viciousness and spite and hate, which is odd from a supposedly loving, tolerant organisation. But then you look at it, yes, it's anti-women, it's misogynistic, in its portrayal of JK Rowling, and then you get this curious, anti-Asian look, because you've got two characters, both of whom look like Charlie Chan.
It's like 19th century Orientalist, isn't it?
Yeah, it's exactly the same thing with the Yellow Peril.
Yeah.
And you've got Andy No, one of our great friends, on there too. I mean, so you're ticking every box of what you're not supposed to be ticking. We're so inclusive. And you think, what's went through their head that they would think that this was in any way appropriate? And that just goes to show how blinkered, when you're so indoctrinated by this vapid ideology, it blinds you to the very realities that we can see about us, in much the same way as that cartoon in The Guardian not so long ago, which portrayed the anti-Semitic rendering of whatever his name was.
Yes.
It's the same thing.
Yes, yes, exactly. That was the guy who was the chairman of the board of governors.
Of the board of governors.
And yes, it was outrageous. They do look. I mean, like even the form of the cartoon was sort of very mid-century propaganda, wasn't it? It was all hellfire.
It really was, but the really funny thing is what always happens afterwards. So they say, we made a mistake, like Basil Fawlty, I'm so sorry I made a mistake. And then there's this ridiculous statement that they make, which is, we believe in inclusion, we think people should be able to love as much as they can do. And we believe that so much, we're dealing in misogyny, we're dealing in racial stereotypes, we're being completely and utterly hateful. Yeah, it really shows how captured these people are. So anybody, if you're, if you're contributing to Oxfam, if you're giving donations, then for God's sake, stop.
And of course, they have their strongest presence is in sub-Saharan Africa and Africa, where of course the views that they espouse are completely opposite to the mainstream views of the people that they're trying to help. And I'm not sure how well they would be received if they tried that there.
These Oxfam, like these charities that were real pillars of our society. I mean, growing up, Oxfam, everyone knew. Everyone knew. And if you didn't eat, I don't care. Give it to Oxfam. It was that. Or the RSPCA was another one. They were byword for integrity.
RNLI.
But again, this is as we said last week, this is like the march through the institutions, isn't it? The facade, the word has nothing to do now, and the history has nothing to do with what it is now, which is just a bunch of extreme activists.
The other thing as well about this sort of thing is that they would have put that out to an agency to make that video, and it's almost guaranteed now that all creative agencies, particularly in that sort of sphere or whatever, will be woke.
Oh yeah.
So it's not. They don't even have to give them a brief. It's just that's their outlook. That's the way they look at everything.
But you mentioned an important point here, which is that charities and the voluntary sector make up the backbone of British civil society, and we in a large part invented that in this country in the 19th century. And then you see in Scandinavia a bit, and then of course through the Commonwealth, Canada and Australia, they've got St John's Ambulance and the Girl Guides and so forth. But it's largely a British creation, and it really helps explain in one way how we had social cohesion, because it was these things, and the Women's Institute, all of these organisations helped to weave people into the fabric of the nation. And when that backbone starts to crack, well, that's never a good thing for a human or for a nation.
But it's gender ideology, isn't it? You mentioned the Women's Institute there. It was only a few weeks ago that they were in convulsions, weren't they, about should they allow trans women into their spaces? Should that be inclusive? Is that what inclusivity means as far as the Women's Institute is concerned? So it's another one, and they're toppling like dominoes.
This country has always been just remarkable in its voluntary giving, in its charitable work. I mean, just remarkable. And it seems to me that when the society starts to fragment, basically that is one of the things, going back to what we talked about last time, Robert Putnam, bowling alone. That's one of the things that goes.
Well, I think one of the key things there, you're talking actually about the Christian ethic, aren't you? That's very much part of what that is. And we don't have that now, certainly not in public life. That's been removed, transplanted with a gender ethic and with the identity politics, and we worship gender, or we're coerced into worshipping gender, and we're coerced into worshipping the environment.
And as you say, those people who volunteer are overwhelmingly women, overwhelmingly middle-aged to retired, overwhelmingly white.
Actually, I mean, I find myself now, isn't it terrible how our public life can become so threadbare. I mean, my attitude now when people approach in the streets, like charitable people, is one of suspicion. It's one of kind of...
It's tragic.
Yes, not exactly sort of hostility, but sort of like, well, I wonder how much your CEO is paid, things like that, because the charity sector generally has gone through the roof. People get, the people who run them get like 500 grand, and people, little old ladies who give, they think that this money's going to,
it's going to ideologically driven. It's the charity, the charity sector is up there in terms of wokeness, and then the publishing is there, but it's at the vanguard of this kind of stuff. But I said before, it's tragic, and I think it is, because I'm sat here thinking, good. I hope Oxfam goes under. I hope Oxfam disappears.
Yes,
isn't that awful? That's just awful.
I just want to talk as well, just briefly as well, about this report. I mentioned it from Johns Hopkins University, isn't it, in Chicago? They've done a huge global survey about the effect of lockdown, whether in fact it was a good policy or not. That basically, in a nutshell, it was a disaster. That's what they're sort of saying. Some extraordinary statistics, such as the lockdown in Britain saved something like 1,700 lives. In other words, purely lockdown alone saved it. But essentially, it's saying all the things that so many of us said so many people came onto this channel and many others to talk about and said. And I do notice that Peter Hitchens, quite rightly, has been going, has been being interviewed by various media outlets today, so more or less saying, I told you so. This was monumental, wasn't it?
Well, there are so many stats that you can look through and just be aghast at every single one. You've already said 1,700 people, There's another one, you talk about Peter. He was talking, I think it was with Mike Graham, and there's a statistic which is just mind-blowing. Young men between 16 and 39, I think, before lockdown, the percentage of them being depressed, riddled with anxiety, mental illness and all the rest of it was about under 5%. After lockdown, it's closer to 25%.
Yes.
25%. But what was really moving was Peter's response to that. It's very rare that Peter Hitchens is speechless.
I saw that.
He was speechless, wasn't he?
Yes.
And I couldn't believe it. I really couldn't believe it.
And what you have to remember, of course, is that those 1,700 lives that were saved because of lockdown were people who were in high risk factors, people who were in their 80s, in their 90s, who had comorbidities, who likely would have died within months, if not years. And I doubt any of them would be alive now, three years later. Was that really worth the expense of all those people who now didn't have their cancer diagnosed for 3 years? All those people who had heart attacks and didn't and died because they couldn't get ambulances to come to them. I broke my ankle at the same time. It took 6 hours for an ambulance to arrive. I phoned 999. I got an engaged signal because everybody was phoning because they had a sniffle and they were phoning up there. All of those school children who've now had their learning abilities and their cognitive skills decline, and they're now having crises in schools with children acting up and playing up. And all those people who couldn't attend funerals and so forth. When you look at all of the difficulties, and our economy, our cities decimated, still haven't recovered.
And still haven't recovered. I mean,
actually, yes.
London. I mean, just one point about that. The fundamental nature of the assault on children, little children, is unbelievable. I mean, some of them cannot communicate because when they were, I'm talking about very young children here, because when they were infants and toddlers, they never saw people's mouths move, and some of them can't even go to the toilet properly. I heard on the news the other day. So I mean, it's so fundamental.
That's the point. They couldn't see people's mouths moving.
They couldn't see people's mouths moving.
You see, and now it's gradually unfolding, isn't it? Yeah. That masks, for example, didn't really make blind bit of difference. And in fact, the thing is, what was terrible about it is that the facts never changed from the beginning. And there was a colossal loss of nerve, wasn't there? But the facts were certain people were prone to it, right? And that most people, it was a very low kind of risk. Masks made very little difference, all coming from the World Health Organization, not Boris Johnson's government or anything like that. And yet all of those things were turned on their head, and we're still living. I think the effect of this whole thing, we still haven't quite grappled with, actually.
And the visceral hatred you were visited with in the street. If you weren't wearing a mask and you should have been, or you'd just forgotten to put one on, you were rounded upon and attacked.
And also we had exploded the idea that the Englishman valued his liberties. The idea that we were different from Johnny Foreign on the continent, that an Englishman's home is his castle, and that he values liberty above all else. And we know, of course, that even today a majority of Britons would favour going into a lockdown if there was a resurgence of COVID. And of course, interestingly, this story I read in the Telegraph. I haven't read it in the Guardian or elsewhere. And you wonder, will the BBC give as much coverage to this great finding about lockdown's damages as they've done, to every other story, which they gave great attention to stuff that was pro-lockdown. Will they give it to this?
But the good thing about this is this is just the first step or the first set of findings, because there's going to be in 10 years' time, all the children we're talking about, when they've got psychosis, when they cannot socialise at all, and I'm not exaggerating there. If you don't see people, if you don't see people's mouths, if you can't see them smile, then that's going to have a massive impact on you in later life. So we're going to be measuring these things at 10-year intervals, and it's never going to go away, certainly not in our lifetime.
Well, just NHS waiting lists, which are now 10, 20, 30, 50 times longer than they would have been had it not been for COVID. That's what's really scary. People having to wait years, something that would have been a few weeks wait.
I think there are some things that, I say are permanent. I remember at the time thinking we're never going to come out of this the same way. And I was obviously being a little pessimistic because we have, life has kind of resumed. But there is a feeling for me of the stuffing being knocked out of things. I mean, when you talk about cities, in particular cities, I think that what we've seen now, cities have probably peaked, all cities. I mean, not just London. Footfall in your city in Leeds is down 40%.
And of course, Leeds relies very heavily on retail.
Yes, exactly.
So it has a massive impact.
And also in Birmingham, I think it's about 35%. In London, in the City of London, 55%.
Oh God,
55%. That's the City of London, right? So. City of London was always famously quite quiet at the weekends, right? But there are a lot of businesses there, whether they are clothes shops, whether they're sandwich shops, shoe shop, whatever, relied on people being around. People just have not gone back, right? And you also see it in the West End, actually.
And of course, the sector that's been really decimated is the creative industries, live music, comedy, all of those places. That they really haven't recovered. I know lots of musicians, and they're still struggling. Still struggling.
It's not. We've had a terrible time, if you think, in this country. If you take Brexit, and then the aftermath of Brexit, when we were all talking on this channel about this attempt to thwart the thing. And then it was, basically followed up by COVID. And like you, Rafe, actually, that was one of the worst things. I remember with Brexit, I sort of felt, the institutions are no longer what I thought they were.
Yeah.
With COVID, maybe the people are no longer what I thought they were, because the sheer level of compliance and that real petty Jobsworth thing came out. It was quite extraordinary, wasn't it?
It's what I was saying at the beginning of this show. It's that idea of crisis, isn't it? And we're suffering from crises on so many levels. Practical, emotional, intellectual. It seems as though we're floundering around, and we don't know what to do, because everything that helped us make sense of our lives and helped us communicate with other people, all of that. Framework has been taken away, and it's been taken away piecemeal, because you've just described it, and it's very depressing.
Well, one of the things I found most interesting was how it made me realise how we are not the independent actors we actually thought we were. Because if you look at people living in Canada and in America, here, Sweden, and say Hungary, the average person has a radically different view of COVID and what to do than the people in another country. Government and the media actually dictated and formed public opinion, and that's why it was odd on Facebook, for example. If you made a post on Facebook that it could have violated your country's rules on medicine, it would be blocked, but it would be allowed if someone posted that in another country. And that's what I found very fascinating. If we had lived in well, not us, because we rejected the whole thing, but my friends who live in Canada, my friends who live here, have very different attitudes towards COVID, and I find that interesting.
There is a sort of a sense in which, for me anyway, it was like it revealed a lot of things that had already taken place in society, that essentially people said, I was reading, I think it was Janet Daly saying we were infantilized by lockdown. Well, I think we were infantilized before, actually, and it just revealed it. I mean, and also this fetish we have now for vulnerability.
Yeah, safety.
It was like it sounds really kind of harsh, but it was like a kind of celebration of just how vulnerable you can be. I'm not denying people were ill and died, because that's obviously what happened, but it was sort of like this strange sort of, it was almost part, when you saw that Holly Willoughby that statement this week.
Is everybody okay?
But it was the same kind of thing, a sort of strange kind of supine sort of belief in vulnerability.
Well, vulnerability is a currency, isn't it, that people just use? If your vulnerability, you'll use it. You'll use it to your advantage. And see that in every day. With
Anyway,
young people
one thing that
especially.
Harry did say, which is not his place to say really, but he did say that the press should hold the government to account. Just because someone said it, please. Of course, that's what didn't happen during that whole period. Unbelievable, you know. They never even asked, did they, where this thing came from? I mean, you know, or rather, if you did,
Or if you did, you're a conspiracy theorist, or you were
a
racist.
Extraordinary. Anyway, it's no longer here, but we're living with the after effects. Philip, thank you very much, Rafe. Thank you too for watching, and hope to see you next. Oh no show next week. I'm very sorry, but the week after there will be. So we shall see you then. Thanks very much. Hello. If you're enjoying the New Culture Forum channel and you believe in our mission, may I invite you to join our membership scheme at the link below or on our website, newcultureforum.org.uk. Our work is more important now than ever, and we have great plans ahead for the future, but we can't do it without your support. From as little as £3 per month, you can help ensure that we continue on our mission. As a member, you'll receive a range of benefits, including access to exclusive content, invitations to our private events, including here at our studios, free copies of our books, and much, much more, including, of course, our famous NCF mug. If you aren't able to become a member, then please help us by clicking this button and subscribing to our channel. It's completely free. Just remember to also click the bell icon so that you can get notifications when we post new videos. Thank you.